I brought my own hecklers.
Danielle is here. What are we going to sing? What's our first number?
You do not want me to sing. You would take away the prize money. That would be the end of that. I have one artistic talent, and I'm very grateful for it, but singing is not it.
So here's the thing. Oh, my goodness.
Oh.
All right. Whoa, careful.
Hello.
And so that was kind of nice, actually.
Yeah, that is the most fashionable person in this room. Like, we all need to be shopping at her hair bow store.
Hey, so I'm not going to read all of the accolades that attach to Danielle. We'd be here till 10 o'clock. It's not a bad idea, but I will read something that I agree with, because I wrote it. Danielle Evans has more to teach us than we may be prepared to learn. Her subtle control of character and language enthralls us, and her stories dazzle with wit, passion, and insight. As we know, in Hebrew and Christian scriptures, there is a book of Daniel. He is a visionary who is dispatched into that famous den of lions by a corruptible, self-serving ruler, with every expectation that he'll be torn to pieces. He is miraculously spared, however. Angels may have played a role, and he returns to the light of day with new stories, new prophecies. In the books of Danielle Evans, that is, something related seems to have occurred. She published her Office of Historical Corrections during the election season of 2020, which you may remember, a period of unprecedented vexation and political turmoil. In the course of her marvelous career, this author returns again and again from danger with prophetic stories of her own, radiant with intensity and conviction and grace. Lions never have a chance with Danielle Evans. Danielle Evans, the winner of the 2021 Joyce Carol Oates Prize.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, everybody. It's been such a beautiful week to be out here. The book did come out in fall of 2020, and so I spent most of my book tour on Zoom. Like, usually you spend a lot of time alone as a writer, and then you emerge into the world, and the emerging part didn't quite get to happen. And I was delighted that anyone wanted to hear me on Zoom, but it's so nice to spend the whole week in rooms talking to people and seeing your faces and remembering that there's a sort of world on the other side of the screen. So it's just been a delight to be here. And thank you for telling that story. I'm actually, my mother named me after Danielle in the Lion's Den, and my book is dedicated to her. She passed in 2017, so she would have appreciated that. I mean, I appreciated it, but she would have also deeply appreciated that introduction.
That's great to hear. And so one of the key features of the Joyce Carol Oates Prize is that there is a pedagogical, educational, performative dimension. That is that whoever wins the prize is in residence and in the Bay Area, where Danielle has been, and we've gotten to know her very well and admired the heck out of all she's done at Girls Inc., at Cal, in the classes, and in public speaking. Anyway, it's been great to work with you, and we're so happy that you are out here. And so we're going to have a little conversation, and maybe at some point you can join in, please. So I'm going to start. I understand you live in a Swedenborgian church.
I do. It is a deconsecrated church. One of the, I was saying earlier,
they don't believe you.
No, I really do. I can show you pictures
really does live
at the reception later.
Church.
I've got beautiful stained glass office windows. I thought when I moved in, I was like, oh, this will be a perfect Zoom background, but it's almost like too much. I feel like I need a fake Zoom background because everybody's just so confused that they don't understand why I'm at an altar to have my conference with them. But no, I think among the many gifts of this prize, one was the sort of affirmation and the sense that you're not working alone and that there are people reading and caring deeply about the arts. But The other was, I mean, I've been lucky to have a relatively stable career as an artist, but this is the first time in my life I've ever had any kind of a safety net. So what I did with the safety net was buy a church. I moved one block away. I loved my neighborhood, but I couldn't have bought anything in it, and I was living in a rental during a pandemic that was for sale, so I hadn't seen my friends in my house in months, but my landlord kept like bringing strangers in to take real estate tours. And so yeah, one of the things the prize enabled me to do was own a door that I can lock, and there just happens to be a church behind it.
Well, I understand too that you have a very active life with cats, so I really have a question. I've never lived with a cat personally, so I know it's crazy, but it's true. Dogs, another story. So my question is: are cats universally demon-possessed, or are they the transmigrated souls of short story writers from the 18th century?
It really depends on the cat. I don't think any of mine are quite demon-possessed. One is maybe velociraptor-possessed, but the others are very nice. They're all actually very nice cats in their own way. In fact, if anyone is interested in both church pictures and cat pictures, my cat sitter Autumn sends like a beautiful array of photos of the cats who like to frolic in front of the altar, because of course they do. They believe that is their rightful place. But yeah, no, they are, I think, very sad that they could not be here, because the advantage of a Zoom book tour is that they made all of my author appearances and really believed that they were the main event. So it's going to be heartbreaking to them that they were not invited out to do this with me.
Also, you won this really cool prize in December, the Bridge Award, which is a fascinating. It has to do with Italian-American relations. And so my question is, well, first of all, tell us about the prize and tell us if you have really, some affinity for things that are Italian.
Yeah.
I'm asking for a friend.
No pressure. That was one of those lovely, one of the lovely things about how much of literary prize culture happens in secret is that usually you just get some good news out of the blue that you were not expecting. So that call kind of came out of the blue, and it was the first prize I got to go collect in person. I didn't get to go to Italy, but I got to go to the Italian Cultural Association in New York, and the prize was like live simulcast in there and Rome. But it's a prize where every year they award one American writer who writes in English a prize, and one Italian writer who writes in Italian a prize, and then they translate the books. So we sort of immediately sold the Italian rights after I won that prize, which is exciting because my first book didn't get translated at all. And so the Italian will be the first Romance language that the second one gets translated into. It's going to be translated into Korean and Turkish too. But so it was delightful to be able to go talk to some people in person and to see the ceremony happening overseas, and also to just know that that book will be kind of in the world in a different way, and hopefully someday I will get to go to Rome.
And you could practice your Italian because the academy is right there near a very famous school. Now, apropos of nothing, you maybe need to know this now. Wednesday that just passed was National Meatball Day.
Alas, I'm a vegetarian.
Oh, that's right. Don't you always make that mistake with vegetarian?
But I have had some delightful, like the fake meats out here are getting kind of out of control. I during the pandemic, Instagram kept finding me when I was vulnerable, and I accidentally bought a lot of fake meat from Australia. It's a long story. But one of the things I did was make homemade fake meatballs with it, because I could never season them, eat it, I don't know. I feel when you get fake vegetarian food, it's never made the way someone would make it in their house. So I tried to, I'm sure an actual proper Italian grandmother would not have passed her test, but I tried to make proper Italian meatballs out of fake veggie meat from Australia.
Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Yes.
I want to know what the name of your second book is that was translated into Italian. What's the name?
The Office of Historical Corrections. The Office of Historical Corrections. That's the one that just came out in 2020. It's not out in Italian yet. We just signed the contract, so a couple months ago. So it should be out later this year, I think, in Italian. It's a story collection, so
I told you were going to get this question.
I should have a better answer by now. The publicity people are going to be so mad at me. It's a short story collection, so it's a collection of 6 stories in a novella, and I think broadly they're thematically linked by an interest in history and memory and grief and how we remember and tell stories about the past, both kind of personal and familial and national history.
Yeah, and you're going to get a copy, Christina, tonight, a signed copy.
Yes, I signed 100 copies, so if someone doesn't give you one, there is some theft happening.
And it's a terrific short story collection. Just so, I think you all know this, the Joyce Carol Oates Prize is given not for a book, but to an author, a mid-career author. So it's someone who's emerged and still emerging, as we like to say, or some of us like to say. Anyway, it's not about a book, and so we've and you see these wonderful photographs of our past winners here, Geronimo and Tony and Layla and Daniel, and Danielle is our 5th winner. And not that, there'll be another winner someday. Actually, it's coming up pretty soon. But we don't want to talk about that tonight.
I've been trying all week to get it out of them who's going to win next. No one's budging on the secret news. I also
But about the Office of, let's talk a little bit about Office of Historical Corrections.
I'm now following the new literary project on Instagram, and I see, the different finalists and a lot of them. And I guess, could you explain a little bit about how your committee or whoever chose Danielle above all these other people? I mean, not to put the other people, how does that work? Who is on your committee? How do you go about that?
Yeah, Christina works for the IRS. So people don't know that. No, I'm just kidding. You're in the mafia. That's right. So it works like this. There's a long list that comes together in the fall, late summer, fall, and we work on people to nominate, often, usually confidentially, or booksellers, reviewers. Sometimes authors nominate themselves. They come through unsubmittable, and we select a long list of around 30 to 40 writers, not books, writers. And then the jury, which is, there are English professors on the jury and other literary people, and I chair it. And then they hand up a short list of finalists to the board, which I also chair. And then, and then we decide the winner. So it's, who has that? Well, it was, I gotta say, Danielle was pretty, I love every single writer who has been a finalist. In fact, a lot of writers who were long listed who didn't become finalists. I love them all. And I can say this in all sincerity, Danielle was easy to pick. She was very easy to pick. It's a terrific book. And she's a terrific person. And you can see, we've come to know her a little bit in the course of this week. I mean, she's just a wonderful presence. I mean, the kids love her, and the colleagues love you. But I want to follow up on just for a second about the Office of Historical Corrections. It's kind of a semi-serious question. So, are you employed by the Office of Historical Corrections?
I am not. I am employed by Johns Hopkins University, which probably would not condone me correcting people in public.
But there's a way in which, I mean, they're marvelous. These stories are fantastic. The novella, which is titled The Office of Historical Corrections, is a really a wonderful novella about female friendships and black middle class tensions and everything else. It's a tremendous novella. But my favorite story is Alcatraz.
Oh.
I love that story. Alcatraz, it's where our relations often spend time. So anyway, so it's a serious question. Is your book kind of an Office of Historical Corrections? The whole book, not just the story. Is it an effort to historically correct?
I don't know if I would. I think it's an effort to think through the questions. I think as a fiction writer, I always have more questions than answers. And I think part of the question I'm asking is just what happens when you change who the protagonist of a story is. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other versions of the story that are true, right? But whether a story is about progress or trauma partly depends on who in the story you're focused on. And so I think that part of what I'm interested in is just thinking about the different ways people remember things and the different ways that we can start to see underneath the story. I think one of my favorite things about the short story form is that it is a kind of subterranean form, that it is a form where there's something happening on the surface that's sort of asking for your attention, but the real heart of the story is always kind of underneath, and where the story gets you is where that underneath part comes to the surface. And I think that in a lot of these stories, the underneath part coming to the surface is just a slight shifting of the narrative, not to say like this is the one true version of the story, but to say like, what if this person were the central figure in the story? And I think that that can be true in a personal level, but it can also be true as a country, right? That the story we might tell about power might be a story about the country like moving in a progressive direction. The story we might tell about people who've been harmed that centers them might not sound as sort of glamorous and delightful.
So Donna Jones, who was, did a panel with her last night, English professor, distinguished English professor, member of our jury actually, and she was asked the question, how would you teach Danielle Evans? And she sort of didn't know what to say, and it was a brilliant question. And she said, do you remember what she had to say? No, it's been a whole long week.
She said she would teach
it's been
the
a
novella
long week.
because she teaches novels, and then she said a lot of lovely things about the novella, and I'm trying to remember exactly what they were.
Well, okay, Don, it was a great exchange last night at the library. It was fantastic. But Danielle, how would you teach creative writing? You teach literature. How would you teach Danielle Evans?
Oh, I would never teach my own work. I think that part of what I'm trying to do always in a classroom is give them permission to feel things. There are books I don't teach even that aren't my own that I don't teach anymore because I love too much. And I feel like if I can't like bear to have you hate it, then I'm not the professor to bring it to you. I'm not like, there are books that I love. I'm excited about everything I teach. It's not like I'm giving them a whole list of things I hate. But there are things that I am too attached to, either because I know the writer or because the story is just so personal to me, that I'm not gonna bring into a classroom because I have to be able to sort of enter a somewhat objective space where we can talk through. And so, increasingly I spend a lot of my classroom space, because I teach mostly creative writing workshops, and when I teach literature courses, they're craft courses for creative writers. And so I'm always asking, before we get to kind of a yay or nay conversation, I'm always asking, like, what is this? I think that like my first paragraph of every letter that I write to students is just totally value neutral. And I try to start there with the things I assign, like what are the operating questions of this? What is this writer trying to do? And then we can talk about whether the project's interesting or exciting or inspirational for the students and what they're taking from it as writers. But I think what I'm interested in as a writer is mostly things that make me go, how did they get away with this, right? Mm-hmm. The things that make me want to take them apart and figure out how they're working. Those are the kinds of stories and novels I'm drawn to. But I wouldn't teach my own, in part because there's no mystery there for me, and in part because I think it would be terribly unfair to my students to make them pretend to love it, whatever they actually thought. Like, too much pressure.
I knew it was an unfair question. That's why I asked it. Okay. Any other questions? We talked about before. Is there something you want to? Is there something?
Oh, I thought someone had their hand up over there. Maybe I'm sorry. Oh, sorry.
No. Lale.
It's so exciting you know my name. That's like great. It's a moderator. So Ilya Kaminsky, the poet, had a tweet the other day where he said, and who said art is not good during war? And it was a photograph of books pressed up against the glass of an apartment window so that if there was a bombing, they would catch the shatters. There's books all the way up and down. And it like shook me because that's a very arresting image. But there was something about that I think about when it comes to art. And on a planet where there's all of this crazy stuff going on, like for you personally, your energy to get up and write, like what is it for?
Yeah, thanks for asking an easy question. Like, you bring friends to give you a ringer and then they won't.
And that concludes our evening, folks.
No, it's a beautiful question, and I don't entirely know the answer. I know that and Lala and I have known each other, 20 years now. I'm not much of an optimist, but writing is the most optimistic thing that I do because it requires you to believe in the future. And I don't know exactly how that works, and I know there are days when it doesn't. Part of the reason I'm not like a get up and write every day person is because there are days when my faith in the future just isn't there. But I think there's something to be said for sitting down and saying whatever is going on and however much despair I feel about it and however much I believe there might be like 10 different exit ramps we missed for disasters that are coming. Like when I write, that's not the space that I write from, because I have to believe that I'm going to live in a world where when I finish the next, hopefully it won't be 10 years, but it could be, that however many years it takes me to finish the book, and then however many years it takes for people to discover it, that in the future there's going to be a world where people are going to read those words and they're going to matter to somebody, that we're still going to have a future where books exist and people read books, and people in some way, the kind of big timeless questions I'm thinking about matter. And that is the faith that I have to write in. It is a sort of slow, long-term art form, and it is a thing that I don't know how I get there, but in order to get anything on the page, I have to believe that it's worth that kind of slow, lingering process, that there is a future into which that work is going, because it's not for now. If it were for now, I would, there are lots of more immediate ways to interact with people.
Yeah. And yeah, Christina, you were asking about long lists. So Lale Khedivi was on our long list a couple of years ago when she had written a terrific novel called I think it's The Good Country. Is that correct? Yeah, it's a terrific novel. And so, if we were in a different kind of conversation, think about prizes like job hiring and stuff. It's so cruel, and I feel, listening. So when it comes time to say to people they didn't win the prize, that's like the worst day of my life. It's just very sad for me, because I understand as a writer that it's all about rejection. Even when you get accepted, it's a rejection of some sort because somebody else didn't accept you. So it's a very neurotic life. And I think all questions asked of writers sort of come down to really something simple like, are you as crazy as I am? And anyway.
The answer is probably yes.
Yes. Are there any other questions? Before we go. So what's it been like being Joyce Carol's prize winner?
Oh, it's been delightful. Even starting from the beginning, this is just such a warm organization, and I felt bad for the other finalists too, because they were all such lovely people. We got to sort of have a finalist event on Zoom, but just the sort of care and attention that went into that, even though it was virtual and we couldn't gather, was a really beautiful space. And this week has been so nice. Again, I just seeing anybody, but seeing especially people who have spent so much of their time and energy supporting the arts and supporting emerging and younger writers. I think, the thing I was most nervous about before I came out here was the visit to Girls Inc., just because it was it's been a long time since I worked with teenagers. It was walking into sort of unknown middle and high schoolers. I was like, maybe they'll hate me, but they were such a delightful group, and even not all of the students were creative writers, but they were all just so willing to kind of lean into the exercise. And I think, it speaks to how wonderful those students are, but it also says something about the space that they've created and that this foundation has nurtured, that you can sort of walk in and they clearly felt, even though it was the first event they'd done in person in, I think, maybe a year, but certainly many months, that they could walk in and feel so comfortable and trust the people who were running the space. Something really beautiful is happening there. So it was lovely to be there and lovely to be in all the sort of parts of the area that I've gotten to see this week.
David.
The kids who do these workshops love to have people come in to teach them. They see it as something that doesn't happen. And when these workshops happen in places where these kids do not have a place where they think they can write, it makes a huge difference in their lives, in their careers as writers, and I want to thank Danielle a lot for doing what she's doing.
That's David Wood, who's been teaching at, he's teaching at Northgate High School now, but he's been teaching, he tells me, for 100 years. And you got another couple of centuries left to go. And you're working with Noah Warren.
In the next 2 years, I will.
And Noah Warren is your Simpson Fellow, who's, a fantastic poet. Just an amazingly good poet. And there he is back there. All right. Hi, Regan, my editor.
Danielle, when did you know that you were a writer, and what made you know that?
Yeah, I mean, I always wrote, and I think I just didn't know that writing was a job that you could have in the world. I think I was an only child. I read a lot. I told stories. I grew up in a house where I was encouraged to do that and feel grateful for that. And so I think I got to college and realized you could sign up for creative writing classes. And I wasn't really, the first time actually I did it wrong because somehow there was like a class that we weren't supposed to be allowed to sign up for. It was like an application-only senior class, and I'd registered for it as like a first semester freshman. So we got some very sternly worded email from the TA that was like, you are not supposed to be in this class. And I don't actually think it was my fault. I think like the TA had somehow coded it wrong. So I feel like the stern wording was maybe uncalled for there. But but eventually I figured out how to apply for the right level of creative writing course that I was allowed to take. And it was just like, wow, there. So yeah, I think that I met people who kind of wrote for a living. Most of them also taught for a living, but wow, that seems like a pretty nice life. How do I get that? So I asked a lot of questions. And I think part of that was also learning to take writing seriously. I think before I got to school, I thought, well, this is just something I'm good at. Like I write something and then people like applaud me. And as much as this makes it seem like that's what happens, there's a lot of lonely times and rejections in between. And I think, the first time I had a really great experience with workshop instructors as an undergraduate, but the first time I got something like back that I had written kind of covered in red ink, I was sort of like, what is this? Like, that doesn't happen to me. I'm a really good student, but it was somebody kind of pushing me to be better and to not just sort of say, like, I've written this and I felt something and it's done. And I think that when I saw, like, what revision was, like, a light bulb went off. And I think that's why I think if I'd been a bad poet, there might have been hope for me, but I was, like, a thoroughly mediocre poet, and I was content with that mediocrity. But with fiction, I was like, oh, somebody showed me how it could be better, and suddenly it was like never going to be good enough, right? It sort of lit up that obsessive area of my brain that was like, you have to figure out like how to solve this puzzle. And I think especially in the short story form, it really does feel to me as almost like solving a puzzle box, right? Like how can I fit all of these things in here? How can I make this as sort of dense and compact as possible? And so I think it sort of excited me to be able to think about writing in that way. And that's what made me think about it more seriously. So the combination of recognizing that there existed a life path in which one could be a writer as their primary occupation in the world, and figuring out how to kind of think more deeply about writing and revising, and realizing how much of the work was in revision, happened for me in college.
I want to make sure that I thank the English department for hosting Danielle at the Berkeley City Club, and for all of your hospitality with Danielle, and for the project. Thank you so much. So, yeah. So, if there's nothing else, I'm going to say this was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everything.
Thanks. Good night, everybody. We'll see you next year right here.